to another dimension, surpassing the vastness of time and space. The Grand Thoughtmaturgist is here.
Alright Earthlings, flipping lovely to see ya. In this video I'll share some tips on how to start world building for all your lovely little role-playing campaigns. But before we ever butchers at that, why not consider clicking the old subscribe button to help support this humble little channel, and I thank you very much for your time. Now, world building for me is one of the top ways that I can give my creative tendrils a good stretch, and the inspiration to do so may come from a multitude of different sources, be that books, art, TV, films, or other forms of entertainment, such as music, to expanding upon an idea of a themed one-shot. Sometimes players want to linger a little longer than planned in these weird and wonderful worlds of your imagination. But where does an Earthling even start in that world-building process? Well, my first piece of advice would be not trying to create the entirety of a world. That is usually best reserved for super advanced species and deities, and they don't always get it right. In my experience, it's much easier to start more focused on a smaller aspect of the world, perhaps a particular theme or aspect that has inspired you to the world-building process itself. Now, you may have a whole world in your mind ready to scribble down onto paper, and that's great. But my humble advice would be to focus your creative energies on areas more likely to be visited by those who are going to be exploring your world. In the case of RPGs, that'll be those cheeky little player characters. If you haven't got a particular place in mind to start, here are a couple of ideas that might inject some inspiration for your imagination. In the past, I've found that writing down a single sentence that describes the inspiration or theme of the world that I'd like to create can be quite beneficial. A few words strung together can sometimes help supercharge the creation process. From there, the world itself can start to be built. Such inspirational sentences could go as follows. An arid world where water is gold, and those who control the ice mines rule. Or, only cats and rats survived the apocalypse, so now it's war. Or, beneath the icy surface of a water world, civilizations compete to control the depths. Or perhaps, nomadic spacefaring dwarven raiders. Sentences such as these can get the old grey matter working, and from those humble beginnings, vast galaxies could be created. Another handy resource for budding world builders is to approach each aspect and addition to the world with the who, what, why, where, when, how questions where relevant. By asking questions starting with each of those 6 words, creators can delve deeper into the world-building process, building on the original ideas and growing the world naturally from there. I could use the who, what, why, where, when, how questions on those sentences from earlier, for example, to begin the exploration process. For instance, who lives in that arid world we mentioned earlier? And what are the ice mines? Why are the cats and rats at war? Where do they live? Where do they get their food? When is this underwater campaign set? Is it a futuristic or ancient world? Or maybe a mixture of the two? Or perhaps something entirely different? And being underwater, how do they travel around? How do they communicate? Maybe they have some kind of whale song. What do they eat? How do they live? By approaching each additional aspect in this way, I've found that I've been able to greatly expand the nature of each world I create, as well as adding more flavour and depth in a relatively short period of time. For me personally, there are 2 main approaches that I'll take in the world building process. I'll either work bottom up or top down. Both these approaches deserve their own videos to explore them deeper, so be sure to subscribe if you'd like to hear more, but I'll attempt to summarise them both here. The bottom-up approach tends to focus more on a ground-level view, and I find is more handy if I already have a situation or adventure in mind for my players. This creation process tends to focus on what the player characters will be experiencing first. By starting at that point, I can then grow the world around whichever direction the players choose to go. For example, some game masters may begin world building by creating the village where the player characters are introduced to the world. From that village and its humble beginnings, everything around that village is then created from there. And similar to a sandbox approach, the world around the player characters expands ahead of them as they explore and travel about. This can feel a more organic approach as it works together with your party's adventuring. A top-down approach starts with a much broader view of the world. This approach can be handy if the inspiration for the world building itself originated from something much larger, such as a particular region, a nation, or perhaps the very planet itself. By establishing details about the larger aspects of the world, it can help guide a path to more ground-level aspects of the setting. I tend to favour the top-down approach when it comes to creating campaigns based in the sci-fi setting, but it's certainly a viable option for any world building. By starting with creating the world itself, that can help guide the conditions and cultures that are found upon it. For example, perhaps I'd like to create a world with 2 suns and 2 moons. Let's call it Gorlam Rushma, which in the tongue of the dominant intelligent species translates roughly to under the eyes of the 2. As it turns out, that dominant intelligent species believes that the celestial bodies seen in the sky above them are the eyes of 2 gods who watch over them. Considering the top-down approach, I could consider Gorlam Rushma's astronomy when it comes to forming the world itself. The celestial bodies could suggest that the world would be more turbulent as a result of 2 large celestial objects in relatively near orbit, those 2 moons. Perhaps, therefore, our little world that we're creating has very rough seas, maybe frequent seismic events like earthquakes or eruptions or tsunamis. Perhaps mountains are more craggy, coastlines are more cliffy, and seasons are more harsh. Summers could be more intense due to the 2 stars that the planet orbits, and maybe day is far warmer than night perhaps. Maybe due to the fact that they have 2 stars in their system, there could be fewer oceans than your own planet. The nature of the world itself could also have shaped the cultures somewhat. If the native species of the world believe that the celestial bodies are gods who are always watching over them, maybe that would encourage a strict society, fearful of being judged by the ever-watchful gods. Nefarious acts could only ever be conducted under cover, hidden from that gaze, or perhaps only ever during the new moon phase at night. I personally find the top-down approach quite handy, as it could potentially apply a new direction of thought when it comes to world building. In truth though, and in my experience, the methods used to create worlds are often constrained by time and need. I've always enjoyed the process, but world building is merely a luxury for very short campaigns, and especially one-shots where it's often not even needed. It can, however, in my experience, lead to deep campaigns with endless possibilities, as each addition to culture, geography and more can inspire ideas for adventures, which in turn could open the door on new thoughts on culture, geography and more, and round the world process will go. As often, I've discovered it does, but through each cycle that world will only become richer. Anyway, I'm sure we'll look more and more into the world building process, as I'm a huge fan of creating such worlds and campaign settings. Personally, I like to take inspiration from a what-if perspective, and as an avid fan of history, I tend to look into the past and try and think, what if this went slightly differently, or this didn't happen, or someone thought of this far earlier or far later? What if there weren't that resource or technology to hand for these peoples? How would that world have gone if that significant event hadn't have happened? There's loads of ways we can inspire ourselves in the world building processes. I'm sure we'll look a lot more into it, so make sure to subscribe for further videos on how to create juicy little campaign settings for your lovely players to go and explore. I thank you very much for listening and watching this long, and I'll see you in the next video. Ta-ta for now.